Hello, everyone. Welcome to the eighth installment of our hugely popular I Am Kozhikode Alumni series on how to build a career. So, the series where you find precise answers to all the important questions you ask yourselves every day, such as what am I doing with my life? Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Kumar Vivek. I'm from the I Am Kozhikode class of 2009, and I will be your host for today's episode. Today, we're going to talk about careers in the social development impact sector, also known as I'm going to find some meaning in my life. As you would probably know, I Am Kozhikode is one of the rare business schools in the world that features development of communities right there in its mission statement. And of course, we are proud to have several alumni doing exactly this as global leaders helping the world become a better place for all of us. So, in the next 90 minutes, we'll hear from a thoughtfully curated panel of leaders a little bit about their life and a lot of their distilled wisdom. We will also bust some myths today, such as I will find true peace and self actualization as soon as I do development work, or development is basically volunteering full time and hence it is easy, or there won't be enough money to buy a car. We'll be busting these myths. Before we dive in, let me lay out the structure for this webinar and how we are going to make you a part of this as well today. Today's episode will be in 4 segments. In the first one, we'll introduce our panel and explore the journey of each one of them, from B school to the social impact and development sector. We'll also try and understand what key skills and competencies they picked up along the way and how did they make each move in their careers. Then there'll be a second segment where we'll focus on the big questions that many of you will have in mind, such as how do I know my passion? When do I make the shift? What are the entry points? What skills or credentials or degrees should I pick up? How much money will I make? And so on. Then we'll have a third section, which is we have something crafted as a fun rapid fire round where I, as your host, gets to ask 2 questions to each of our panelists to be answered in less than 15 seconds. And finally, we'll have a 4th section where you will have a chance to ask questions. You will have to post your questions in the chat box, and we'll try and pose as many of them as possible to our panelists. When you post a question, please mention your first name and if you would like your question to be answered by any of the specific panelists. All right, so let's get started with our first segment. Friends, please join us in welcoming Arindom Datta, Bhanu Mehrotra, Gayatri Rao, Prashant Kumar, and Rishi Agarwal. Welcome all of you to the How to Build a Career in Social Impact and Development webinar. We're very glad to have you. So let me begin by asking each of you to tell us in one sentence, just one sentence, what is the problem that you're focused on? Maybe I can start with myself. I'm working with the World Bank on reducing learning poverty around the world, which is something that is the inability to read and understand a simple text by the age of 10. So Arindom, one sentence on what you're working on.
Inclusive agriculture supply chains.
Thank you. Manu, what's yours?
Yeah, I'm working with IFC on creating markets and unlocking private investment in economic, social, and urban infrastructure.
Thank you. Gayatri, over to you.
I work on economic development in rural areas and work with women farmers on building women collective enterprises and women empowerment.
Perfect. Prashant, what keeps you awake?
Yeah, my organization works on building socio-emotional skills and providing exposure and opportunities to students in government and low-income schools.
Great, thanks, Prashant. And Rishi, what's your challenge these days?
So as a consultant, we don't make choices. That's postponement of choices. So we work on everything that is right to dignity with life. So healthcare, education, water, sanitation, and livelihoods.
Perfect. Thanks. Thank you very much, everyone. So let's we'll also try to understand a little bit very briefly on where you currently are and how your journey has been until this point. So let me start with Arindom. Arindom, you came to I Am Kozhikode with almost 14 years of experience, and you spent a decade with NABARD before that. And after B school, you went to IDBI, CARE, and then finally heading to Rabobank, where you work on rural and development banking advisory. So tell us a little bit more about your story.
Right. Thanks a lot, Vivek, and thanks a lot, Ronald, for stitching it all together and getting all of us on the same platform. It's a pleasure to be speaking to the alumni and the current students of IMK. So, as Vivek mentioned, I joined IMK after about 12 and a half years of experience. It was all in the public sector. Now, the reason for me to explore life outside the public sector was after 1991, when the Indian economy opened up. A lot was happening outside in the private sector, whether it was in the banking or in the real sectors like agriculture. And I did feel that as a part of the public sector, I was missing out on all those exciting developments, and maybe I was not, imbibing enough skills which were available, which were required in the new world. So that was the reason that I moved to the Indian private sector, which was IDBI Bank, which doesn't exist anymore because there was a reverse merger with IDBI. I was heading their agribusiness there. From there, I moved to the development sector, that's CARE International. It was at that time the largest development sector player in the world. And it was the largest in India in terms of the resources that are committed to the Indian market. But all along these three different sectors, the theme was on agriculture, microfinance, access to finance, etc. And then when I got an opportunity with Rabobank, for any person who has any kind of interest in agriculture and access to finance, Rabobank is a good organization to work with. So when I got an opportunity to work with Rabobank, I joined Rabobank. It's been an excellent time I've spent for the last 14 years. So all this was not really by design. It's by default. Things happen. So public sector, Indian private sector, development sector, and now a multinational, but I wear two hats. One is a commercial hat and one is the development hat. I'll stop here.
Great. Thanks, Arindom, for sharing that. You next. You came to Kozhikode with about, I think, 9 years before as a work experience, including in the civil services in India. And after stints with Planning Commission, CRISIL, you ended up joining IFC, and now you are the senior investment officer there. So how has your journey been from the government and now with IFC?
Yeah, thanks, Vivek, and it's a pleasure to be speaking to the IMK community. It's a great feeling. Thank you for organizing this. I had come to IMK on a study leave from the government. As you pointed out, I was in the government for a long time. But by the time I ended the IMK studies in 2 years, my family and I were not ready to move on to the private sector, although that was really the motivation with which I went to IMK. So I returned back to government. I think one of the reasons also was that I had a bond and I wanted to be ethical and contribute back and then only see what my opportunities would be. But when I come back, I did extensive profile building work. I sort of refused to take on very cushy, regular middle management jobs or administrative jobs or roles, and instead sort of took up very proactively, very unstructured problem solving, strategic roles within the government on return. And over a period of about 1.5 years, I was doing things which were putting me in the center of strategic developmental roles wherever I was. And what this enabled me to do, along with very thorough and extensive networking within the government, was to be selected by the then Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Montague, being picked up for a very new and unique role that came up in the Planning Commission. And I was picked up on central deputation and largely building upon my MBA. And then my post-MBA positioning myself in strategic, unstructured problem-solving roles, because this particular new position involved the work which was de novo, which was being done for the first time, so to speak, in India, which was to drive large-scale private investments into infrastructure building in India. So doing airports through private participations, building highway networks, and a lot of infrastructure. And how do you put in place investment frameworks for that? So this involved a lot of commercial thinking, and there were very few people within the government. So it wasn't like a startup sort of a setup, but very high visibility, high profile. And so I spent 3 years there, and I was able to get good opportunities in terms of doing some very visible, impactful work. So 3 years later, when I decided to resign from government service, which has its own story, I was picked up very eagerly by CRISIL as head of PPP, and later by IFC, which is the International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank Group, which was just starting a PPP transaction team. So I would sort of continue to work in the area in which I was working within the government, transplanting, but growing the skills from there, but also growing some private sector skills, some in-depth commercial skills, and so on and so forth. And so, but one thing I would say that the movement from the government to the IFC was not so easy. It had to be sort of built up over the years. It was highly competitive. And in fact, I had to appear for 9 interviews over 10 months to get in. So it has been 12 years since then in IFC, doing very, very satisfying work across geographies, not only in India, but in other regions as well. And so that's been my journey so far.
Fantastic. Thanks, Banu. Very interesting. And thank you for sharing it with us. Next, I'll move on to Gayatri. Gayatri, you came to IIM Kozhikode from the IT sector and spent 4 years in corporate strategy. You like Banu, also spent some time with the Planning Commission and a little bit in politics, which is always interesting to hear within development as well. And then you moved to United Nations Development Program. And then very interestingly, you decided to move to Harvard Kennedy School. And then I think this is the first year when you will be heading the India office for the global development nonprofit that you are part of. So tell us how all of these fascinating moves happened for you.
Thanks, Vivek, and thanks, Ronald. Thanks to the entire team for organizing this. It is, as other speakers have echoed, I just echo their feeling of being able to talk to the IMK community. So as you mentioned, I did come with 2 years of experience in design and development in wireless communications to IMK, and then I sort of moved to corporate strategy for 4 years. And in the beginning, I started thinking about making a shift to the development sector, and towards the later part of my stint with the corporate sector, I decided more resolutely to actually make the shift to it. The first shift that I made was to the Planning Commission, mainly because I thought it was a great opportunity to move to an organization like the Planning Commission. So I unfortunately at that time the Planning Commission was also being dissolved by the current government. So my timing wasn't very great. I was there for about a month when it was being packed up. So after that, I moved to the political advisory sort of space, and I learned some really shocking and surprising realities of politics and political campaigns in India, which right now in hindsight seems like it was a really amazing learning for me. And during this time of working in political campaigns, I realized that this wasn't the exact subsector within development that I wanted to continue working in. And at this time, I shifted to after about a couple of campaigns, I shifted to UNDP to work with the Ministry of Rural Development on a program called the National Rural Livelihoods Mission, which is one of the largest rural poverty alleviation programs in the world. And here is where I sort of found my area of interest, and where I have since then continued to work in. And there I was working as the mission manager at the national level, implementing rural value chain development work across all states in India. And it was a sizable portfolio, including Government of India funds, World Bank funds, and some other non-profit funds as well. And after about 3.5 years of working here, I thought it was a good space to take a break, get back to student life, and just refresh some of my skills. And that's where I went to the Kennedy School. And now I'm back. I'm back working with some of my professors who were at the Kennedy School, who are working in India with the Gates Foundation, with Seva, TRI, Pratham, and we're implementing a lot of programs on rural value chains, collective enterprises, and economic development. Yeah, so that has been my journey so far.
Great. Thanks, Gayatri, for sharing. I think I picked up the point on political campaigns. I'm sure we can't discuss that live, but would love to know a little bit more about it later on. Let me move to Prashant. Prashant, it does take a lot of courage to become a social entrepreneur. In general, entrepreneurship is something that's very hard and not for everyone. So, how did you get to this space?
Yeah. So for me, it was actually a mix of following my heart and also realizing and acknowledging what I didn't want to do. And like, though it happened sequentially, like as logical steps. So I came in with a background in manufacturing, and IMK was all about getting to know more about operations and supply chain management, thanks to Dr. Saji. And then it progressed on to a role which primarily focused on supply chain management in Accenture. For 10 years, I did enjoy doing that role, working with clients and helping them with ERP solution on SAP. But over a period of time, I think roughly around midway in my career, like a decade in Accenture, I started realizing that somehow I was not like enjoying this as a career option for my next 20, 25 years, whatever was remaining. And once that realization hit me, it was more about now going back to what my heart was saying, and which was education, something that I had tryst with through my school and college, which I found something that I really enjoyed. And then I finally took that decision. While I say that in one sentence, but it was like a 5-year gap before from realizing that and finally making that decision. So that's the amount of time it took for me to convince myself that this is something that I'm able to do, taking care of the financials, the family in line, and just making that leap of faith and going forward with that. So that brought me to Teach for India, where my education journey and my journey with development sector started. And then since then, yeah, I've been here, did a bit of teaching, and now running my organization, where I came back to my first love, which is operations. So it got me best of both worlds, being able to stay connected with education and also manage large-scale operations. So that's where I am.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Prashant, for sharing that with us. And then I'll come to Rishi. Rishi, you currently head one of the world's best known social sector consulting firms. Before this, you did a lot of things. You did FMCG with Unilever, you did strategy consulting with Monitor, you even did executive search with Russell Reynolds. So how does all of this come together for the role you're currently in?
Thanks, Vivek. So for me, it was, the journey started at IMK, got a pre-placement offer at Unilever, joined their commercial team to begin with, but was lucky enough to be picked up for their internal consulting team for the region, which sort of brought up my passion for consulting. And that's when I decided I wanted to be a consultant full time, and went on to join Monitor Group, where I was a consultant for 7 odd years. Was quite happy there, honestly. I wouldn't have left if the acquisition by Deloitte hadn't happened. That was my push to sort of see what else I wanted to do. And one of the questions that as a consultant always baffled me was, I came up with what I thought were good strategies. At least I thought they were really good strategies. and sometimes they won't be implemented. And my question always was, why would the management not implement them? So I wanted to understand the people side of things, where I went into the search industry, where I was trying to understand what drives behavior, what do CEOs, CXOs think about their career choices. And for me, the learning was paycheck gets you so far, promotion gets you so far. For you to be happy in your job, you need to go beyond that. And for me, that was finding purpose and doing work which was slightly going beyond the commercial aspects and looking at the most challenging problems. So what drove me was intellectual curiosity, and that's how I landed up at FSG, where we tried to bring our skill set, which is we had a bunch of strategic management consultants, McKinsey, BCG, Bain, Monitor, who are trying to bring the core skills we learned in strategy consulting to the development sector. Just because the development sector is not seen as being as glamorous, there is no reason we shouldn't have the cutting edge methodologies that are being applied in the business sector.
Great. Thanks a lot, Rishi, for sharing that. And thank you everyone for sharing a little bit of your journeys. I think there are two things that I can take away from this discussion. One, all of us did speak about the fact that you love your jobs. That's really heartening to hear, and I'm sure the audience would be noting that point. It's not really easy to find that job satisfaction even after several years of one's careers. And I think second is that it's not really about planning meticulously every move to the T. And maybe all of us should leave a little bit of life itself to unfold, while at least being genuine in our intent and what we want from it. So maybe perhaps the creative discovery process is rather underrated, and at least that's what got me to work in education as well, just like Prashant. I did software, I did a little bit of strategy consulting roles as well. But working for the World Bank now is my fourth job, and probably the best one I've had so far. Great. So with that enriching discussion, let me close the first segment and move to the second one on our webinar today, where we'll focus on some of the big questions that many of our audience will have in mind. Let me start with Prashant again. Prashant, you spent a decade in software, as you mentioned, and then switched to full-time teaching fellowship in DFI. So was there some sort of a magic wand that told you what your calling is? And would you say that this would probably hold true for others as well, who volunteer to support in your venture, or is it something else?
Great. So yeah, I mean, in my case, it was, I mean, when I reflected on it's about what I really found joy in, and then something that thanks to like my time during schooling and even in college, I had multiple instances which I could reflect on, which kind of gave me that realization that I truly enjoyed teaching. And that's kind of brought me to the step where I could like commit 2 years to join our Teach for India fellowship. And that's like another point of transformation that happened, which really got me sold on to the idea that I wanted to stay on with education. But I don't think it needs to be like a magic wand or like an epiphany moment for everyone, that in a moment you realize that, hey, this is exactly what I want to do. And in some cases, when people do realize what they really want to do as well, I know there are a lot of worldly limitations that people have before being able to make that decision. I mean, trust me, I do know that as well. It took me 5 years to finally, after actually knowing that I wanted to get into teaching and being there, that was a long 5-year gap. Yes, and by the nature of work that we are doing as well, which is primarily volunteer driven, I feel that's like a very good option for anybody to test waters. And then specifically in development sector as well, now that things are really opening up, there's a lot of openness to the whole idea of volunteering. There are a lot of roles that are available across different kinds of sectors and roles that are available, which gives one the option to be able to experience and test out whether what they really think that they are enjoying or would enjoy, does that work out really well. And that's an option what we get to see in my organization as well, where say we worked with around 250 volunteers last year. And what is endearing for us is to get to see that a lot of them actually post their volunteering, which is like a commitment of around 3 to 4 hours a week. they go on to like take up full-time commitments into education, into teaching. Some of them joining the Teach for India Fellowship, some of them joining teaching as a full-time job outside the social sector as well. But eventually it got them to their calling that they really wanted to get into teaching. So I find volunteering as definitely a great option, something that can give people that perspective if it is actually what they think it is, and then that's like a low stake option to test out what you really want to do.
Right. Thanks, Prashant. And I think that quite rings a bell in the sense that where we are today versus where we were 5 years or 10 years earlier, I think there are a lot more options that have also opened up for people to really test and either through volunteering or various other ways to really know if there is a way forward in the sectors where you're interested in. Let me pose the next question to you, Gayatri. What was the reason behind your switch? Is it something that you really wanted to do, and you were working actively towards getting that, or was it more like something, I'm open to opportunities, and it will be nice to do something different, so let me try something.
Yeah, thanks, Vivek. So I think the first switch that I made was to move to the development sector, but it wasn't very specific in the sense that I did not fully understand the structure of the sector. What are the different kinds of opportunities that are there? What are the different kinds of roles that are available? So I think the first move, while I was sure that it was to move to the development sector, I wasn't really sure of what exactly in the development sector I wanted to do. And over the next switch, when I sort of understood how the entire sector function. There's a consulting part, there's a government, there are non-profit, there are the funding agencies. So it is quite a large and complex ecosystem, and to understand where I would fit in, it took me a while. So I would say that the brief phase where I sort of worked with the Planning Commission and then worked in the political space and understood what the landscape of the development sector was, that was really critical for me to make the next switch to UNDP and the National Rural Livelihoods Mission, where I found my space, that this is where I can actually implement the skills that I have. This is what I am interested in, working on policy, working on implementation, and working with the different stakeholders on the state to actually have on-ground impact. So I would say in hindsight, it might look, or at least to me, in hindsight, it might look like it was step by step, or it was very deliberate. But I would say that was a period of where I certainly had to exercise some patience to understand and to think through where I'm moving next.
Perfect. Thank you, Gayatri. You mentioned a lot about the complexity of the ecosystem, which I think is something which is really hard for anyone to figure out about what this sector is, because it's not just a company which has a mission. There is a lot more to it, because there are these interactions and with the community, with the government, with international government, etc., etc. So taking that point forward a little bit with you, Arindom, on the complexity. You spend a lot of time in the Netherlands, and The Hague definitely is a large center of development businesses who are at least based in Europe. And by extension, it's also perhaps one of the few places where we'll see this complexity, the crucible of the government, the businesses, and social impact organizations coming towards. So when you see an ecosystem like that, what is it that comes to your mind in terms of career opportunities for people, and how would they want to figure it out?
Thanks, Vivek. That's a difficult question, a complex question, but I'll try my best to answer that. Now, firstly, regarding the development sector, as was rightly pointed out by Gayatri and by Vivek, there's a whole continuum of opportunities which are there, which can be termed as development. Now, it can range from local NGOs who are working on education, health, agriculture, nutrition at the grassroots levels, all the way to multinationals, bilateral organizations, large funding organizations, the UN system, World Bank system, etc. So there are a lot of organizations within that. Now, 10 years back or 15 years back, the distinction between the development sector and the private sector was very, very clear. It was very clearly demarcated. But now, the good part is there are two developments, or rather three developments going on. So one is the development sector has started engaging with the private sector in a big, big way. It didn't happen before because the private sector, not only in India, but globally, was looked at with suspicion as these are the guys who only look at return to shareholders or return on capital, and they are not bothered about the other social issues, which is not true anymore. All the private sector, large multinational companies today, whether we talk of Unilever or my bank, which is Rabobank, the world's most sustainable bank today, there is a lot of mission-driven work that happens which borders on development work. It's about whether it's the SDG goals or whether it's about other sustainable sourcing, or it's about measuring the impact that you have on the people, on the ecosystem, and on the external stakeholders. So the private sector is also imbibing a lot of the development sector lingo, work, and they are getting in resources from the development sector also. So the lines have got a little blurred in the large global organization. It's because of consumer demand. Consumers want their companies they deal with to be more responsible. It's because of regulations, especially the regulations in Netherlands or Europe are extremely, extremely stringent about reporting on, say, climate, carbon footprints, or on social impact, both the positive and the negative sides. So that's one. Thirdly, if you look at the SDGs, and if we as a society, we have to achieve that, there is no way one sector can live to that, the outcomes which are envisaged in SDGs. Whether you look at the government or the development sector or the private sector, it just cannot happen alone. They all need to work together. And that is what is developing very, very quickly. And the different sector players are learning to work together with other parties. Again, as I mentioned, 10 years back, they would never have engaged. They would have never spoken the same language. They would not have understood each other. SDG 17, the SDG talks about collaboration, it talks about partnership, it exactly talks about this. And this is something that we are all learning by the day. Now, when you talk of Netherlands, I'll just give that example because I work for a Dutch bank. Now, I was immensely surprised when I went there for the first time. I spoke to the leading agriculture universities, some of the largest funding agencies in Netherlands, and the private sector companies and the financial institutions there. They work seamlessly there, and they don't really make a distinction between the private sector and development sector, and the movement of resources from one sector to the other sector, it happens all the time. It's a natural progression, no questions asked. So people keep jumping from one sector to other, and all major national goals that the government achieves, it's through the private sector and the development sector research institution. So that was extremely, extremely impressive. And when we compare it more to Asia, India, the developing world, the emerging economies, one of the big hurdles we need to face is that how do we make this transition happen of having different sectors work together, of getting the right kind of human resources across different sectors, whether it's the government, whether it's the the development sector. And the good part is it started happening. It started happening is as the economy opens up, as the problems are getting more and more complex, whether it's COVID, whether it's the climate challenge, that the realization even in India or in Asia is coming that we need to work together. So, and we can see among the panel members, I mean, very competent people who could have done very well in the private sector, but they have decided to push the boundary and to explore opportunities. So, that's the movement which is happening in India, and the more it happens, the more are the chances of better outcome for people in India, better outcome for society, and better growth for all of us together. I'll stop here, Vivek.
Thanks, Arindom, for sharing that. I think something that you mentioned about the shift in how the capital is coming in. Earlier, there was development which was probably different, and now there is a lot of development capital coming from private sector and a lot of sort of working together is happening, and that's something that I see in the World Bank as well. How it is transitioning from being a development bank, which is purely for funding development capital to governments, to becoming something called a leveraging bank, where the idea is how do you leverage more capital from commercial markets as well. And that also shifts the kind of skills and opportunities that are coming up with that kind of a shift within the sector. Let me expand on that thought and ask Bhanu a little bit to come on this interesting thread. Bhanu, you spent some time with the government in the civil services, shaping infrastructure policies and investments in India. And now you're with IFC, which is, again, an organization purely focused on where the capital is coming from in development. So how do you see a little the interface that's there between government and development, as well as the private sector, and is there some sort of silo breaking happening these days?
Yeah, so thanks. I think I'll just build on what Arindom has already said, and I think much of this interface that we're talking about, and I would like to contextualize it in terms of what is the debate, or in fact, it is post the debate that has already gone on, in terms of everybody's and each institution's role being, especially the government and the development sector's role being, how do you maximize finance for development? So there are limited finances available on the public sector side, or with multilateral institutions or other development institutions, etc. And the problems are too huge and complex. So this concept of maximizing finance for development has therefore put a sort of a framework before each of these institutions, which is basically called the cascade framework, which means that you first go and look at a private sector solution to a problem. If you can't, if it is not an area which is ready for a private sector solution, then only you fall back on public sector driven or purely subsidy driven or government budget driven solutions. And therefore, one of the critical things in this interface is how do governments and multilateral organizations or other development organizations help to create markets. So this is where our role as MBAs or as business people sort of comes in the bang in the middle of this whole trend, or whatever you may call it. So how do you actually deploy your deep financial and commercial skill set to help the government and the private sector think of how do you create markets where the private sector can then come in, invest, build infrastructure, provide public services, and so on and so forth. So really, that's the interface that we all, in some way or the other, should sort of. That's a high growth interface, I would say. There are obviously other things as well in the development sector, as my fellow panelists spoke about. I think, as you know, the work of government is getting more and more complicated in terms of creating market. Government also needs some deep understanding of business aspects, to shape the policies, the enabling policies, and the investment frameworks that they need to put in place so that the private sector can play and bring in their solutions to all these complicated developmental challenges. So this work becomes highly technical and complex, and on the other hand, you see similarly the private sector also needs deeper understanding of policy, of government decision making, stakeholder management. How do you take everybody along? As such, professionals on either side of this divide, which in fact is not such a clear divide now, as Arindom said, it has started to melt down. As such, professionals on either side of this, whoever is excelling from either side, from the private sector side, from the development sector, from the government side, are valuable for each other. So because those who bring in the skills, and complete the picture, because all of the solutions being put in place are very innovative, creative, and have to sort of bring in the entire gamut of managerial expertise, technology, capital, etc., of all the sectors together. Now one issue really comes is what skill sets would sort of be required in this managing this interface. I think obviously financial and commercial skill sets become important from in either side, whether you're on the private sector side or on the government side. but excellent integrating skills, then tolerance of slower government processes. So if you are a professional who wants to move with very fast, quick project life cycles and quick investment cycles and so on and so forth, you'll find it hard to sort of play the slower government processes. And tolerance on slower government processes and position, if you have an integrating skills to work together with financial and commercial, deep financial and commercial, then that's how you could position yourself for managing this interface well. And lastly, I would say one perception normally private professionals might have, which is that if private professionals engage in this sector, they might have to play a second fiddle to government officials. And I, in my experience, have found this is not at all true. There are value pockets that you can sort of pick on. You can position yourself to be highly visible, driving the agenda of change on the development sector, driving solutions, and we can always share more of our personal experiences around that.
Perfect. So thanks, Bhanu, for sharing that. I think you brought in two specific points. One is that there is a lot of skills that exist on the private side, on the social side, and they are complementary to each other. And increasingly, as there is more integration happening, the skill requirements, at least to perform in the jobs in development, are becoming more and more complex. Rishi, let me try and bring you on that front in helping for our audience translate that complexity of skills that's required in the development sector into what really can be picked up by students who are on campus or even for people outside. What do you think are some of the key skills that are needed to succeed in development amidst this complex ecosystem that the rest of us have been talking about?
Sure. So I think it was interesting to hear both Arindom and Bhanu talk about markets as a route to impact. Exactly what our co-founders, Michael Porter and Mark Kramer, have talked about in shared value and sort of thinking beyond just pure business. Now, there's this misnomer that development sector is easier and therefore, you can do it with lesser skills. The actual reality is you need actually more skills, because I've done both corporate consulting and development consulting. Corporate consulting, you're dealing with, as Bhanu was saying, you're dealing with defined variables. You'll have to deal with the management team, but you have a defined market which already exists. Where in development, if you're looking at coming from the market route, you're being an entrepreneur, you're trying to create markets. And that's always far more tougher, as Prashant would testify to. So for me, what you are looking to succeed in development sector, and when I say succeed, I'm not talking about your personal success, but creating impact, then you need to have all the skills that you would think of in the private sector. But beyond that, you will need to have three skills which stand out for me. One is ability to collaborate, because that's really, really key when you start getting into multi-sectoral processes. Patience, as Bhanu was saying, things take longer. Unexpected things will arise which you had never thought of. And because of that, empathy and flexibility, which is, I'm cheating, I'm combining two in one. But for me, those would be the other two skills you bring in to really succeed in this sector, because it is one of the things where unless you empathize with the customer, and I always use the word customer rather than beneficiary because I think that's demeaning, then you have to be flexible, empathize, and bring in all these skill set that any corporate client or any private sector entrepreneur would bring into the play to this sector.
Thanks, Rishi. So I think you're mentioning about both the things. One, it's really hard in terms of technical skills as well, and the notion that it's easier perhaps is a myth that definitely needs busting. But then also there is this softer aspect, which is much more crucial to succeed in development, which is about having that right empathy, perhaps the emotional resilience to succeed in that sector. So if some of those skills perhaps could someone had to pick those up, then what do you think are the entry points in the sector? Does one start applying online on career portals, or in a lot of other career webinars on this channel, we have heard about networking? What's your opinion in using those skills to actually land up with something meaningful?
I think we have 6 interesting stories right here in the panel, right? And one thing that was common was it wasn't sort of like, apart from rare circumstances, most people have sort of landed in the sector through a process of self-discovery. Now, I don't expect people in the B school to have that sort of level of self-realization, self-actualization, or even self-understanding with what I want to do with the rest of my life. So there are multiple points you can enter. You can enter immediately after B school, where you sort of say, okay, I'm going to experiment and see if this sector is for me. You can enter mid-career, which at that stage you are clear that you want to spend the rest of your time creating impact. And I've seen a lot of folks actually spend time in corporate careers, building a nice nest egg for their retirement, and then saying, now I'll create impact and be grassroots, right? And in which case you are actually running an NGO somewhere or being advisor to NGOs and leveraging your personal skills to catalyze the impact. So you can enter at various points. To me, the answer would lie in the question you're asking yourself. Is it, am I there to create impact? Do I want a career or do I want a calling?
Sure. That's very interesting, Rishi. So let me follow that up with you, Prashant. So you spent 10 years trying to find your calling, had a chance to volunteer, and then see that teaching was your passion. But entrepreneurship in itself as a career, Prashant, is difficult in at least in markets like India and a lot of other developing countries because there are fewer business models that typically exist, especially for if you had to put your MBA hat and think about corporate returns. There are very few of those models, but obviously the space is maturing as we have been discussing through this webinar than how it used to be 10 years ago. So tell us about two things. One is what skills does it take to become an entrepreneur if you had to think about social entrepreneurship? And two, what skills would you look for as an entrepreneur if you were to hire someone?
Great. I mean, as Rishi was already mentioning, the skills that is needed in a social or development sector to be like working or maybe as an entrepreneur, it covers almost all the skills that's generally needed for an entrepreneur, straight from like networking, strategic thinking, financial acumen, like communication skills, so on and so forth. But what is needed here is probably like a lot over and beyond that. I'll specifically want to go into a couple of things which I feel is paramount when you are looking at being an entrepreneur in social sector or even actually working on a key role in a social sector. One is like a complete passion for the cause that you're working for, the problem that you're trying to solve. And that's something that's the root of the work that you're trying to do. Because what solution that you're trying to implement, I'm more talking as a social entrepreneur now, the solution that you're trying to implement could change over a period of time, depending on what things are working out. Some things may not work out. And also at times due to external situations like what's happening right now with COVID. But what's important is still to be rooted with the core cause that you got into this for, what's probably closest to your heart. So as much as being married to that cause. So that's something that's very, very important, which we look at from the perspective of hiring people as well, even if you're talking about team members joining the team. Alignment and passion for that cause is one core. I mean, I won't call that as a skill, but that's a necessity for you to be able to do well in the social sector. And along with that, I think one realization that I've had, and I have spent a quite short time in the development sector right now, 4 years. But being there on the ground, one thing that you realize is for you to be able to survive and actually do well, you need to have a strong heart. Because I feel like one of the most challenging things about development sector, I mean, apart from the money part, which definitely is improving, is all the emotional struggle that you go through day in and day out, being there on the ground. And particularly, say in my case, working with students, working with kids coming from low-income communities, like it's almost like a roller coaster where you have a lot more of emotional lows than the spikes or the highs that you would get in between. While they more than make up for the lows, but something that you struggle with day in and day out, and you need to have a heart for it. I'll just take a few seconds more just to talk about one particular case that's closest to my heart. Is a student of mine that I taught during a fellowship. So she became an orphan before the age of 8, and through her whole schooling life, she is living with her extended family, where day in and day out, she's made to realize that she is unwanted and then go through a lot of abuse. And that's the stories that you get to hear every day you go in to teach her, and it breaks your heart. It's so much of a struggle. But right now, as we speak, so the last 2 years of her higher secondary schooling, she went to a college called United World College, based in Pune. And now she's just preparing to travel to Wartburg University to pursue a undergrad. So that's gives you the kind of joy that yes, somebody's life has changed, though you might have just a very tiny bit to play in that. But the kind of joy that you get from that more than makes up for all the emotional lows that you have been through over the last 4 years. So yeah.
Thanks, Prashant. So I think once again, apart from hard skills, you are stressing the point on emotional resilience, because this is a sector where probably it will keep coming back to you as you're working with your beneficiaries / customers. It'll keep coming back that perhaps the people you are working for are in need, and it's not very easy then to operate in that sector. Coming back to the discussion on skills and opportunities, Arindom, what's your view on this topic? Would say a Rabobank role require solid finance skills similar to what private sector banking or other finance tools require, or is there something else that you think makes the cut? And how does one simply get a job, let's say, in a place like Rabobank?
Okay, thanks Vivek for that question. Again, it's contextual. It depends on the organization. Now within Rabobank, and I think in some extent generalize it for most of the multinationals, whether in the financial services sector or in the real sector. Now there are obviously roles which requires hard commercial professionals, right? When you're in sales, marketing, you need to be very, very commercial, and that's usually what an MBA student is kind of used to. But as I had mentioned earlier, most organizations today, because of the mission statement they have a plethora of different kind of functions, different kind of objectives within the larger mission, which cannot be done by these professional commercial personnel. So you require a mix of many different kind of skill sets, which could be knowledge of grassroots level agriculture, what could be knowledge of who are the leading development sector players, or on climate issues, on climate reporting, on understanding the impact of climate, whether it's mitigation or whatever aspect of climate. These are becoming extremely, extremely important. So there's a whole host of professionals within the Rabobank group who have never worked in a commercial organization. And so far as the career opportunities within the bank, so far as the compensation packages within the bank, so far as recognition is concerned, it's exactly on par with everybody. There is absolutely no discrimination whatsoever out there. So that's extremely heartening, and that will happen only if the larger mission goals is led by the board of the bank and not by a corporate communication piece, which is happening to a large degree with the CSR initiatives in India. I'm being blunt here. But if it's ingrained in the DNA in your mission and it's led by the board of the bank, then there are varied skills which are required. The other aspect which is happening globally, also started happening in India, is diversity. There's a lot of studies, and these are serious studies which have happened. I think Rishi could speak more about this, is on how diverse organizations, where you have diversity not only in terms of people, their background, but also in terms of their previous experience, when they get together, then the impact they create, not only in terms of furthering your financial goals or your economic goals, but overall in improving the culture of the organization, in achieving larger goals, in being able to come up with different kind of solutions, is much, much more. So diversity is becoming extremely, extremely important. And with diversity is also people from different kind of background, experience, educational qualifications, and all of that. But there's absolutely no discrimination so far as opportunities are concerned.
Thanks, Arindam. So I think you were laying out two things. One is that there is, in the development sector, there is a lot of interdisciplinary knowledge that's required at the individual level. And you see a lot of interdisciplinary people coming together at an organizational level as well. And I think that really makes this job exciting, that you are really working with people who have not earned the same stripes through their careers, but really have moved from places to places and bring in very different set of expertises and make you gain and learn a little bit differently as well. Bhanu, I'll be placing the same question to you. Is that something similar that you see at IFC, and how do you see hirings happening at IFC? What sort of evaluations and assessments happen for roles like that in the IFC?
Yeah. So, so in IFC, there are multiple entry points, So one, of course, is when you are taken in as a regular staff. So that regular staff means you are basically running on initially on 2-year contracts, and they can be longer contracts, and they keep rolling. So continuity is often not an issue. If you're performing well, it just continues. But those are all advertised positions. So those positions are basically advertised on the website of IFC, and everything goes through a structured process of application on site, shortlisting, interviews, multiple interviews, and it's fairly merit based, very quite transparent sort of a process most of the time. So that obviously will take in people at different levels. One is at a first level is an investment analyst sort of a position. This is typically an undergraduate with number skills and analytical skills, some finance background, but not much. But a typical MBA would be entry point would be as an associate investment officer sort of a profile, and that would be typically not straight out of MBA without any experience. It needs at least about 4 years of experience. So an MBA with 4 years of relevant experience is what who can apply for associate investment officer position, and then it goes on. And a lot of positions mid-career are also advertised all over. So they are ranging in all over the hierarchy in terms of when they are needed in different teams and different geographies. So that's basically position based. I think the second is a program for recruitment, which is called the Young Professionals Program, which is the common program with the World Bank and MIGA, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. So IFC, MIGA, and World Bank, they have this young professional program where people apply to. It's a highly competitive process. I think somebody has put a question on that front, so we'll deal with that later. But that's somebody who is typically 4 to 6 years or maybe more, but is below a certain age threshold, can apply and go through that global competitive process to be selected either for the World Bank or for IFC or for MIGA, and there's a full website page dedicated to it, which you can Google, and it very readily goes there. We can speak to that as well. I think the third thing that people can keep in mind is also of short-term consultants. I have seen many people who are not so sure about entering the development sector, etc. Or they have great private sector skills, but they are in some interim period of their life or their careers, and they want to explore. They take up short-term consultant contract. These are like 150 days in a year. You can do anything else in the balance of the year, and this is very expertise specific. So if you're working in finance, in infrastructure finance, or in financial, any other of the sectors which IFC works in, you could sort of be in touch and network with the relevant teams who also advertise these opportunities, but also through networking, you can sort of land up with these short-term assignments, which are paid quite well paid assignments, but they are short. And sometimes the way to step into the other opportunities is also goes through taking on short-term consultant assignments as well sometimes. And lastly, there are obviously internship opportunities. Again, that is centrally managed, so it's not like the country offices don't do it. It's really managed from headquarters, and so you have to apply on site. And quickly, about 1,500 people or so apply every year. About 30 or 40 get selected through a competitive process, and then they get assigned to areas. So I think in terms of skill set, it's pretty much finance related, industry related. I mean, any of the industry, whether it is financial sector, manufacturing, agribusiness, or uh, uh, so or infrastructure sector. Any such sectoral experience of 3 to 4 years becomes relevant. But major skill is financial analysis and financial skills, so to speak. And then, of course, whole lot of you have to demonstrate your commitment to the development sector by having done things where you can say you are dedicated not only to investment banking type of roles, but also to sort of roles which are developmental in nature. If you can demonstrate that, that puts you in a good position for these things.
Thanks a lot, Bhanu, for very clearly laying out at least the hiring process which is there in IFC, and I can resonate it with it because the World Bank and IFC belong to the same umbrella organization. So everything you said also applies to the World Bank. And you were mentioning about short-term consulting positions. That's something which happened to be my entry route in the World Bank. After my 4 years of corporate career with strategy consulting, I spent a year with the government, and that's where I had a chance to know people from the World Bank who were working on various projects that were funded through the bank and working with the Government of India ministries. That's where I had a chance to network with some of those. Was offered a chance to work as short-term consultant to support some of these programs, and I did that for almost 2.5 years, because it's really interesting as a short-term consultant, at least in the bank, because the role is very clearly specified. It allows you that flexibility to explore something outside as well. So I think it's one of the best entry points, because it gives you that view of the organization, as well as lets you network within the organization to really know what you want to do if you had to join an organization like this. Coming to finally to you, Gayatri, you went to Harvard Kennedy School, back to school to perhaps to get additional academic training. What is it that leads to that decision? Do you think that there was a need to gain additional set of skills than what you already had to really perform in the career in development, or was it something else?
Right. So, KV, before coming to my decision, I think I'll address your second question first, of what are the skills. So, I do think that our degree at IMK does prepare us or equip us with a lot of the skills that are required to function in the development sector as well. So, like many of the other panelists have mentioned, you could draw from the other experts that are present. It could be agronomists, gender specialists, education specialists, while you're implementing the project, getting things done on the ground. And that is, I think, a key skill that is even required at this time in the development sector, of having enough professionals who can get things done on the ground. And coming to the other part, that is of why, or are there additional skills that are required? Yes, I think at some point it is not absolutely necessary, but I think at some point it does help to gain some additional skills in some of the key areas of development, such as impact evaluations, or even getting a perspective on what are the innovative programs, or what are the things that are working in other regions and geographies. And I would say that my decision to go to the Kennedy School at this point, which was basically around the 5-year mark of my being in the development sector, was partly driven by this, that I did want to step back at this point and get a new perspective on all the skills that I have gained. So a lot of the technical skills are gained on the ground. And I do not think that going to the Kennedy School actually added to my skill set of what I learned from the ground, working in the field in India. But it did give me a perspective on how international development is being viewed, what are the new actors that are being added to the development sector, and also network with other students, other professors who are involved in some of these innovations with the government, with the multilateral agencies, or with not-profits. So I would say it's not necessary, but at some point it does help to gain some of these skills from an university. It's like, going to a premier university like IMK as well gives sort of a boost. It's the same with going to the Kennedy School as well. So that is one of the reasons that I went. And of course, it was good to go back to school and live the student life, even if it was for a short period of time.
Perfect. Thanks. There's a bit of echo, so I would request others to mute. Thank you, Gayatri. So now let's shift gears a little bit and directly address what's the elephant in the room here whenever there is a development sector conversation. And let me start with you, Arindom. What's your take on compensation and benefits in the development sector? Is it really far off from corporate careers?
Well, if I have to ask a counter question to answer that, your question. Now, in the private sector, if I have to ask the same question for the private sector, now 90% of the jobs in the private sector are not paying well. If you're just looking at compensation, it's only the cream who are getting very good salaries. And it's a hard struggle to reach that position where you really make money. If money is the main motivator, it's extremely similar in the development sector. So, as I mentioned, there's a wide spectrum of organizations who can be defined as development sector players, including the private sector players. Now, the compensation package is extremely wide. It's extremely difficult to define the compensation package, but it could be, it would compare pretty well to a normal private sector job at all levels, I would say. There are international jobs where you go as an expat and you get your $1 million salaries and huge benefits. So there, like in the private sector, development sector offers a wide array of jobs depending on your experience, depending on your expertise, and that is what defines your compensation. And the compensation can be extremely high. All I would request, especially the young students who are listening into this conversation and this rich discussion, is if you look at some of the global big development sector players, let's talk of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or the Ford Foundation or the Rockefeller Foundation or the Dell Foundation, just have a look at the profile of the management of these companies. These are people with 20 to 30 years of experience from the best of corporates, and they have, the best of degrees from the Ivy Leagues, and in no way are they compensating really in any way on their package, the financial package. They are very handsomely paid. So again, for the best and the bright in the development sector, there are huge opportunities, and I don't think compensation is a big thing to think about. It's about realizing as to what is it that you don't want to do. I think it's a good way to eliminate some of the jobs that you don't want to do. For example, I never wanted to do a sales job. I never wanted to do an operations job. And it's, discovering over the last 10 to 15 years as to what I want to do. And so far as compensation is concerned, because I also head Rabo Foundation in this part of the world, it's not inferior to my commercial colleagues in the bank. So it's a wide array. But there is one general comment I would make, that in general, the development sector invests a lot more in the people than the private sector. They give them opportunities to pick up new degrees, to get more exposure, and they have very well-defined kind of norms to be able to develop the personal and the capabilities within the organization. that's been my experience, is that they try to develop the skill sets of their employees a lot more than the private sector, because private sector people have no time whatsoever to take a year off uh, as a paid kind of a within while drawing your pay and compensation to be able to do something which doesn't relate to the objectives of the organization. It's extremely rare there. So it's very wide, and compensation is not really a problem. I don't think, I mean, that's something we need to discuss, because compensation follows your competencies. It's as simple as that.
Sure. Sure. Thanks, Arindom. So, your opinion is having low compensation in development, that's really a myth. And B, you probably find good employers in development compared to a lot of what you would find in private sector. Let me pose the same question now to Rishi. Rishi, tell us a little bit about your views on how compensation in development really compares to private sector compensation in similar roles. Is there really a drop, or and if based on those numbers, do you think that it should impact the choice of organization or the timing of entry for someone who wants to get into development?
So I think let's answer your second question first. So there have been enough studies now, behavioral scientists and management scientists who have proven that money is a barrier to happiness and job up to a certain point. So as long as you can meet your basic needs, as long as you're getting enough money to save for your old age, money is not what drives people. Money is what not drives happiness and job. Having said that, money is important, right? Especially in a country like ours, where there's no health cover, where there's no old age pension cover, you will need to save for your old age, and you need to make sure you have enough for contingencies, right? There's a data which essentially says 80% of your healthcare expenses would come in your last 2 years. So you need to be prepared for that. I have a slightly different opinion from Arindam. So while I agree with him in absolute numbers, you will get probably as high paying a job as others. It's the quantity of those jobs that will differ, right? Because the number of such jobs in development space would be still lower than in the corporate sector, because there aren't 500 BSc listed high cap equivalent foundations in India, for example. Right. So one of the things you have to be clear about, if you want a high paying role in the development sector, you have to be willing to be mobile. You have to be willing to move countries. You have to be willing to move cities. And that's one of the things which would allow you to have a better experience and be better compensation. And again, something which I agree on, Arindam, is how do you define compensation? Compensation is not just about money. Compensation is about the investment the companies make in you. And in development sector, most companies would invest significantly in you, not just as training, but just as individuals, right? I've been in consulting firms, and some of the consulting colleagues that I've seen, there's a bit of a clone culture. You can tell this is consultant from, I won't name the firms, but X firm or Y firm, just by the terminology they will use, by the behavior, by the way they will dress. Most of the development sector would offer you the opportunity to be an individual, to have your own thought process, to sort of bring your own passion and bring the whole you to the job. To me, that's one of the things which should allow you to be better suited and have happiness and work, rather than just worrying about compensation. Numbers can go quite high, right? As Arindam was saying, at bank you can get up to 500,000 easily if you're in senior roles, or at Bill and Melinda Gates you can get to 500,000 if you're a deputy director, not even a director. So there are numbers you can get to which are reasonably high.
Thanks, Rishi, for sharing that. So I think what we hear both from Arindam and Rishi is money definitely doesn't buy happiness, but then there is still significant money to be made here. The places might be fewer in between, but the more important message is that development sector also develops you in a lot of ways, which you might not get in the corporate side. Fantastic. So that concludes our second segment of today's webinar, where all of us heard from the horse's mouth on some of the questions we didn't know whom to ask. With that, let's move to our third segment, which is our special rapid fire round. I get to ask 2 questions to each of the panelists. And so what I'll do is I'll first call out a name from the 5 of you, ask the question, and you will have 15 seconds to answer. All right? Perfect. So let's get started. First one, Gayatri, what was your happiest moment working in development?
I've been lucky to have multiple happy moments working in development. So I would say whenever I see impact on ground, it's a happy moment for me.
Fantastic. Rishi, if you were hiring for your organization, what's the top quality you would assess?
Intellectual curiosity.
Are you hiring? No, that's you don't need to answer that. I'm just kidding. Bhanu, if you could pick one development cause amongst so many of the challenges in the world, irrespective of your skills or organizations, which one would you pick?
So I'll pick climate change because it affects so many other things as well.
Prashant, 15 seconds for you. Tell us the most frustrating thing that happened while working in development.
Yep. I mean, I can clearly call that from the compensation discussion. There are people who still think that because we're working in a non-profit sector, we are not supposed to take salary. And in fact, my mother still thinks that I'm broke, and she gives me money every time I go, which I happily take and donate it back to my organization.
Great. Arindom, you're next. Which one would you hire? A hardcore banker with deep interest in development or the development sector veteran with very strong financial skills?
The first one, a hardcore banker with deep interest in development, because if the private sector teaches you efficiency the way other sectors don't teach you. That's extremely important to be imbibed by the other sectors.
Perfect. So that's the message for the people who are hunting for jobs. Next
And
one.
Vivek, let me give you an example here. I hired a guy from IMK, and what I do is I hide the name of the college. I tell my HR not to show me the name of the college so that I am not biased in any way. So when I interviewed him, I asked him. He said IMK, 10 years of solid, Citibank and ICICI Bank experience, and now he's building up some of the best blended finance solutions in the Indian agriculture market. So.
Excellent. So that's a message for everybody. Arindam doesn't do nepotism at all. Bhavin, next is you. What is more fun, being at the headquarters, in your case, Washington, D.C., or working in the field offices, which would probably be in a developing country?
Yeah, no, I mean, initially it has to be the field office because that's where the creativity is. All the big interesting stuff is happening on the ground. So initially there, but if you are you're stuck on vertical growth and networking and working and growing within the organization, at some point you have to be mobile and you have to be ready to go to HQ because that's where next level of growth comes from.
Correct. Gayatri, next is you. Answer very carefully. This is a difficult question. Huh? Which one would you pick, Harvard or IIM Kozhikode?
IMK, of course. Not nearly enough parties at Harvard.
All right. Prashant, next is you. If someone wanted to get into social entrepreneurship, what space do you think has the best opportunity?
Yep, that's rhetorical. I will always say education because I really believe that education can change the world.
Completely agree with you because I work in education as well. Arindam, next question for you. Hypothetically, I am a 24-year-old student in the second year of IIM Kozhikode. I want to work with farmers somewhere in the village in India to promote organic produce, but my mother says, "Beta rishte nahi aayenge iske baad." In 15 seconds, tell us if you agree or disagree and why.
My friendly advice to you would be, so far as your career is concerned, don't listen to anybody who's more than 25 years older to you. Just don't do that.
Perfect. Thanks, Arindam, for that advice. And my last question for you, Rishi. What would be your one parting piece of advice, the 15-second version, to anyone who wanted to get into social impact and development?
Keep at it. There would be opportunities at just keep at it. Don't give up.
Great. Keep at it. Wonderful. That's the message for us to take. So that was awesome. Thank you for being candid and hitting the nail with your responses. With that fun round, we now move to the fourth and final segment of today's webinar, where we'll take some questions from your the audience. There are some questions which have already been posted in the chat box, so maybe I'll just ask one. Have any of our panelists, this is a question from Sashank, have any of our panelists have felt frustrated by the lack of speed or scale of tangible change that their organization is making? And if yes, then how have you handled it? So, yes, please, Arindam.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Bhanu made that point earlier. If you're working in the development sector, you cannot work in isolation. You work with the government, with the private sector. So there, one of the key kind of qualities you need to have is to able to communicate and understand the different sectors. So speed is should not if speed kind of discourages you, the lack of speed discourages you, you should not be there in the first place. If you are out to make a difference, things like efficiencies and speed of operations, they should not be the main consideration. It's about the larger picture and contributing to that and making change happen as and when it happens.
Sure, and I think that's something which a lot of people have in mind, that development sector is slow. So it will be good to hear from others as well. Maybe Gayatri, do you have anything to add to it?
Yes, I think I can add a bit from my experience in working with the government and government programs. So I agree that some of it or implementation with the government and these programs are slow. And one of the reasons is because of the number of unknowns or uncertainties that we work with in the development sector. And something that was mentioned earlier was for us to bring in more efficiency and more proactiveness in develop or in implementation in this sector, and in that sense, I think bringing in more MBAs also helps. But to add to the question, that yes, there is a lag or delay in implementation. But from my own personal experience, I would say that if you stick to it, if you push hard enough, it does happen. Maybe it didn't happen in 6 months as you had planned, but it does happen 1.5 years later. So and that the fact that it happened is more important than it took a little longer to happen.
As Rishi said, keep at it. Prashant, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, working in education, and I'll just add on to what Rishi already said. First thing is to understand, acknowledge, and accept that change is going to take time. And when we talk about education and working with children, it's not going to happen like a tangible change that you see in a year or 2 years time frame. So that's one thing to acknowledge. Working on the ground, it's important for us to not just wait for the impact to happen and then just rely everything on that. To look at what are those shorter term outcomes that you could see, which are indicators for that change to happen. So yes, it's important for us to keep a track of how things are shifting in a gradual manner, which will eventually lead to that impact. But yes, patience is probably one of the biggest virtues that a social entrepreneur could have.
I see Rishi raising his hand as well. Rishi,
I'll just add to that, which was, I think it's unfair to brush the government in one broad stroke as well. Government is not all bad, right? There are individuals in government who are brilliant champions of innovation. We worked with Delhi Jal Board long time ago, where we helped them write the first private-public partnership tender for water kiosks. And it wasn't our initiative. The water commissioner reached out to us and said, we had spoken at ASCII and said, I would love to take this sample from what you're doing in rural India to urban, and we hadn't even thought urban would have an application. So it's not as if, it's unfair to sort of say government only obstructs. Government can catalyze as well. But as with everything else, as I said, this is an entrepreneurial job, and entrepreneurial stints, creating markets is not an overnight thing, right? I can launch a new brand, Atta brand, tomorrow because the market already exists. But if I'm going to create a new Atta market with micronutrients built in for nutrition perspective, that's going to be a tough ride, right? So it's just be aware of this. Just don't just think of challenges as being commensurate to the problem you're addressing. So you have to have patience to overcome those challenges.
Just to add, if I may, Vivek, to what Rishi said, he made a very interesting point and a very pertinent point that we need to appreciate that the government deals with public money, taxpayers' money. So obviously their processes are more complicated because they need to protect the interest of the main stakeholder. So they cannot, and they will not spend money the way a private sector spends money. I think we all need to appreciate that.
So just a quick one. I think a couple of things I have seen, frankly, initially when I joined, I was in a day trading mood where I needed to see the results the same day, and now I'm in a long-term investment mood. So I have totally shifted. And in fact, even on my finances and everything in life, frankly, that shift has happened. So I really think in the development sector, the biggest issue is impact, and that's the whole reason that you would that's one of the big reasons that you'll be there, and that impact will have windows of opportunities, and these are not every day open to you, but you have to position yourself the same way you have to position a long-term investment. So and you have to be patient, and that's what I discovered. So yes, there were frustrating moments. That's why I spoke about, but you learn that if you are trying to spot out where the windows of opportunities are, where are those champions which Rishi spoke about, because champions are extremely important. So where are those champions? And then third thing which I was taught in the development sector was the whole concept of shaper versus taker, which is not very different from private sector market development or business development sector. That you really have, I shifted my whole focus of being a taker, from being a taker to being a shaper. So, and that really has helped me. You have to go out and shape that opportunity, shape that impact, and the real takeaway will happen only when the window of opportunity arrives.
Right. So thanks, Banu, for sharing that. I think the message we are hearing again and again is keep at it. There is a different motivation why you join the sector, and keep at it, and success will come. Nonetheless, if there was one last question I have for Gayatri, is that if things really do not seem to be working out for you, do you think you can still move back to the private sector?
In personally, I do not have any such intentions of moving back to the private sector. This is a job that I enjoy and will continue doing. And on the question of moving back to the private sector, there are a few opportunities in terms of, it depends on what exactly you're doing. So for instance, people who are working in financial inclusion or in developing financial products, or in the agribusiness side, can move to the retail banks who have similar products. And I do know some of my ex-colleagues who have moved. And of course, there is the consulting side, where you know that the government is increasingly engaging with the Big Four, with McKinsey, with BCG on a lot of projects, including Skill India, Clean India, what have you. So those opportunities are there. And just to add a cheeky analogy with the private sector, I mean, it's just as difficult to move after spending 5 years in marketing to go to finance. So it does. You do have to think through that. There are different skills. There are a lot of skills that are transferable, and there have been a lot of instances. And as Arindom and Bhanu have already mentioned, that there is increasingly the private sector and the public sector are working together. So there are plenty of opportunities.
Right. Rishi, any closing thoughts on this question, on getting back to the private sector?
It's a question of at what level are you, right? So if you are already at a very senior level, then obviously it will be much tougher for you because you have hung your hat on what your expertise is. At junior levels, I would say don't worry about private or public sector, just worry about the skills you're building. At the end of the day, if you look at all the reports that talk about market growth, talk about the next billion consumers, the next $1 billion markets coming from the middle class, coming from the lower income households, who else would be better placed to have an understanding of those than you if you're working in the development sector? So I would not sort of get too fussed about whether it's private or public sector, because increasingly it would be a trifecta of sectors which will have to solve for social problems. So, you will have opportunities.
Perfect. Great. So in the last 1 minute, let me just close this fantastic webinar. Thank you, Arindom, Bhanu, Gayatri, Prashant, and Rishi for your time and sharing a piece of your life as well as wisdom with all of us. Thank you everyone who joined us in the audience, and thank you for the fantastic engagement in the chat box. There was a relentless backstage team that worked hard to bring this production to you. So thank you everyone in the green room, as well as the Kozhikode Alumni Association for this opportunity. We have also curated an incredible resource book with a never-before list of organizations in the development sector and their career pages. You can find the more details in the video description below. I would encourage you to check it out. And the recording of today's webinar, as well as all of our previous webinars, are available on the Kozhikode Alumni channel. So do not forget to subscribe to our channel for access to all the past videos, as well as notifications and reminders for many more awesome stuff that will be coming from us in future. Thank you once again for tuning in. Have a happy Friendship Day, and bye-bye.
Thank you.